Welcome back again, class. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about listening and speaking methods for teaching English as a second language learners. Today we're just going to be highlighting a little bit of an overview with the works by Nation. Here's the textbook here. It's an excellent book. I love Nation's work. He's a linguist who is also a teacher, and I definitely recommend the book if you don't have it already. This section of the book, he's going to be reviewing again what he calls the 4 strands of language teaching, a concept that I just love. It very neatly encapsulates all of second language teaching, the areas that need to be covered. So it's an excellent element. That also includes the becoming fluent in speaking and listening. He talks a little bit about balancing these and what are the principles that are involved in the 4 strands, and then learning goals associated with them. So let's just run into these 4 strands real quick and let's get started here. Nation in this book, as in his other book, Teaching, Reading, and Writing, both of them begin with a small discussion on the 4 strands. And the 4 strands include these 4 areas of meaning-focused input, meaning-focused output, a language-focused learning, and then fluency development. And really, that encapsulates everything that you need for language teaching. The meaning-focused input is obviously focused with listening and reading. But it's not just listening and reading. You're not just learning tips and tricks and learn how to do things like cluster and listen for particular sounds, because the focus is not on the language. The focus is on understanding the meaning encased within it. I remember reading an article about someone who talked about the message that rides on the letters. And what I mean by this is that we have a word here with these 8 letters. Is there 8 there? It looks like 8. There's 8 letters there, and they all are combined to create something. And scientists do the same type of thing when they're studying DNA. And they're amazed at the complexity and how they're put together and how they're weaved into this double helix and that kind of thing. And they're interested in the actual mechanics of it. They're not interested necessarily in the meaning that's riding on top of it. When we teach language and we teach just the components and we don't teach the meaning that's riding on top of it, we lose a lot of people. So Nation, throughout this whole thing, wants to stress that we need to spend a considerable amount of time on meaning-focused language teaching. That includes input and output. So in this case, meaning-focused input would be the reading and the listening. And there are opportunities in class for listening to a material, get that input, and it's meaningful to the student. And the same thing with reading, that it's meaning-focused. And so we're not just teaching the specifics or the grammar or the structure or the function. No, we're going to be teaching also what's going on in the meaning. What's this story about? What's this article or this advertisement about? We're going to have to talk about the meaning of things. Meaning-focused output is that they're going to actually be participating in pushing out, pushed output production is another way to call this, pushing out content by speaking and or writing. Now, oftentimes there's this idea of delayed output, and Nation would say you don't need delayed output. Start working on pushed output production early on, so that again students can begin to push things from your short-term memory into your longer-term memory. Take that working memory and push it into longer-term memory. It's also going to be more motivating. But that's not the only thing that we do. You see, I look at these 2 in particular, although less Crashonian, there still is that Crashonian communicative idea that we want to just focus on the meaning, and we're going to forget about the linguistic, the language elements. And Nation doesn't do that. Nation then adds another component that's his language-focused learning, and we need to focus on that as well. I know that it was Peterson who did a very long study on focus on form, and his conclusions out of his research were that in addition to having the focus on meaning, there are times where students don't understand something. They have to stop. They focus on a linguistic or a syntactic or a lexical element, and that's an opportunity to focus on that language-focused learning. And then finally, for communicative skills, fluency development. And that students need to be able to have that opportunity to study and practice the language so that they can increase their fluency. I remember when I lived in Japan, and there was an interview that this gentleman had. He went out to Tokyo University, the highest, best university there, and he was interviewing these students that had passed their English exams, and they had worked very hard, they'd studied very hard, and all of them, when they saw this man with his camera and his microphone, all of them ran away. And they ran away because they knew how to dissect the language, they knew how to understand what the meaning of something was, but they didn't know how to speak. They didn't know how to act and react and interact in the language. So it was a very interesting thing to see that they had no fluency development. Now, if you look at language approaches, oftentimes you see a particular group that will focus only on these or focus only on this. The older versions focused only on this. Nation pulls them all together and say, no, we need to have all of them together. Meaning-focused input. It's input that's focused more on meaning. Meaning-focused output. You're trying to get something communicated, an idea. Language focus. We need to focus on the lexicon and the syntax databases. And then fluency. We need to be able to communicate smoothly and easily and have that social interaction. All nicely put together in these 4 lines. Very well done. Now, as a teacher, the question, of course, is how do you balance this? How do you balance these 4 strands? Now, Nation says ideally 25%. 25% in meaning-focused input, 25% in output, 25% in language development, 25% in fluency. You'll have to decide how you're going to want to do that. There are some people who are very good in language fluency, and so you should work in other areas. If you study research on the amount of time it takes to learn things, typically students who have been studying, let's just say you studied Spanish for 4 or 5 semesters in college, you're probably done with grammar. And that element is gone as with regard to language focused learning. You're probably gone with it. You're going to work on other things. But in a classroom, according to Nation, ideally it would be best to have 25%. Again, that's not going to be etched in stone. Learners, while they're studying, need to focus on meaning, which is typical in Crashonian communicative ideas, but also they need to focus on form. They need that balance. And I really like, again, I like that about Nation. We're saying, yes, we need to focus on meaning, but we also need to focus on form at times. We are still working and learning this system that we're using to communicate with. So we want to spend a lot of time communicating, but there are times where we also want to spend time on the tools that we're using so we can use them better. Nation also talks about the idea of incidental learning, and these aren't his words, these are my words, but he indicates that incidental learning, for example, extensive graded reading, a lot of comprehensible input, is very important, but it also means that students learn less quickly. They put things into midterm or long-term memory less quickly than if there was deliberate learning. If there was specific focus on, for example, minimal pairs where you have a word in English and then in the native language, or you have a word and an explanation, and you put them in, you do some activities with those, and they're focused on helping students to learn vocabulary, students are going to learn more. So with incidental learning, they may have a less ability to have acquisition of language, but it's more interesting, it's more fun. And then there's there's deliberate learning where you're focusing on linguistics or syntax, and for most people it's less enjoyable, but you're going to learn faster. So you have this big balance, because motivation, in my opinion, is the key. If you're not motivated, if it's boring, you're not going to continue, right? If you're very motivated, even though it's boring, you're going to keep pushing on it, because you know eventually you're going to have enough tools, language tools, to actually be able to play in the game. You're going to be able to play in the band, or whatever it is, whatever metaphor that you want to use. So Nation here says, now we need to balance this. We want to keep them motivated, we want to keep it interesting, but at the same time we want them to move along and start learning more of the tools so they can play more properly in the communication game. So we want to blend language focus, if we're doing a language focus element, we try to blend some meaning into it. And if we're dealing with something that's very meaning rich, we want to try to blend some language focus into it. I particularly enjoy having a block of text that the students are interested in, and I know within that block of text there's a there's a sentence that they're not going to understand because the grammar is beyond their current capabilities. But they love the story. And so as we're doing the meaning of the story, all of a sudden we come to this piece and we're like, well, what's this mean? I don't get this. And now I can focus in on the grammar of something, right? Or if it's a vocabulary, I can focus on the vocabulary of it. We can talk a little bit about some of the nuances or some of the connotations involved. And then, of course, we can leave then the language focus and go back to meaning focused. And you can do that both ways, and that's going to make a more interesting classroom. Also does something to increase this whole idea of teachable moments. You know, where the students kind of fall into this grammar element that they need to study, or they kind of fall into this interesting topic that's within you know, a language-focused element, and we can then talk about that topic. So you want to blend your way in and out of these. If you're primarily language-focused in one area, you want to try to blend into meaning and vice versa. I really do like that idea, having them mixed. Nation then goes on to talk about a variety of principles of the 4 strands, and let me just run through these real quickly. Large amounts of comprehensible input, which I don't deny is a good thing. You need to have lots of information that they can have extensive reading, extensive listening, extensive writing, a whole bunch of stuff so that they can play with the tools that are there. So we're going to need a lot of that. We also want to encourage noticing. Excuse me, as I mentioned before, we want to have noticing so that people can notice specific words, specific linguistic structures, right? Specific information. Nation suggested that if you're dealing with a block of vocabulary that you want students to learn, and they're reading a story, so for example in class, or they're reading in groups, and you hear them say the word, you point up to the board, see there's the word right there, and you can use that kind of interaction just to help them notice more. Key for language learning is the ability to notice. So it's definitely a plus if you can do that. While they're doing the meaning focused, right, you also throw in some of these, hey, notice this grammar, this vocabulary, notice this, you know, this learning strategy, so that they can pick them up and start using them, right? Include pushed output production, right? Your meaning focused output. And you get them to push information out. It doesn't have to be accurate. There's that whole accuracy, fluency debate that may be going on. But with pushed output production, get them to push it out, and then they can do more analysis with it later on. Encourage cooperative learning. Do group projects, pair work. There's nothing wrong with competition, and I strongly think that lots of people love competition. If you don't believe me, go look at a local football or basketball game. People love competition. But at the same time, you've got 5 guys on the basketball court that are working together. So there is that cooperation. And you should encourage that, because the more they're bouncing off people, ideas and questions and whatnot, the more they're going to learn. So definitely a plus. Include deliberate training in syntax and lexicon, as we've talked about earlier. Yes, we want a lot of the meaning focused, but we want deliberate instruction, because deliberate instruction is going to help them learn things faster, right? We'll make sure we keep motivation high. Teach learning strategies. Teach them how to be able to teach themselves, right? So basically, you as a teacher trying to get rid of your job. They're trying to make them independent learners so they don't need you anymore, right? Allow time for fluency practice. There are some people inside extensive graded reading that suggest that every class period you give 15, 20 minutes for reading practice, allowing them to read. I am probably diametrically opposed to doing it in class, but we want to have opportunities where they have to do that. At some point where they're going to be doing that, we want to give them opportunities to expand their practice and their fluency. Again, try to balance the 4 strands. Also plan for repeated coverage. The way I normally look at it is kind of like a slinky, where you cover certain information at different intervals as you go through the process. This is also used in the the elementary curriculum for schools, and so we should do the same thing with language. There are certain elements that you're going to reintroduce because they may have forgotten some of the concepts that you're going to be talking about, right? So plan for repeated coverage. And finally, use analysis, monitoring, and assessment to help students learn. Okay, so you should be watching and listening, trying to figure out what they know, what they don't know. You should be monitoring what's going on. When you give a test, don't just give them a grade. Give them back that test and allow it to be useful for them so that they can improve their work. That's the primary goal of you as a teacher. So use those assessments to help them learn more of the language that they're trying to learn. Okay? Lastly, in this chapter, Nation talks about the learning goals, and that we should list the items and the goals down, okay? And the learning goals, he puts them in this mnemonic list, that there are learning goals that are language related, language items, things like pronunciation, lexicon, and grammar. And those should be goals that are incorporated into the class. There are ideas or content. Those should be incorporated into the class. In addition to the language items, there are the skills. Listening, speaking, reading, writing. Also, we have fluency, accuracy, and strategies. Now, I often say that I call these the skills, and I call these the databases. Your lexicon is a database, and your grammar rules are a database. And both sets we need in order to accurately function in language. Okay? So anyway, language items, ideas, skills, and then text. Things like topic types, which he talked about when you're teaching writing, your basic interpersonal communication skills, your text schemata, the background information that you might have on a particular text that helps you understand what's going on. And so you ought to be listing these goals when you're teaching your classes, not only in your syllabus but in your daily stretch of classes, and even in your activities. You should list these particular goals. And that's all for this chapter. I do hope you got through this rather easily. It wasn't too hard. It was a basic overview. Next week we'll talk a little bit more about listening, and then we'll get on to speaking afterwards. Any questions, again, please ask or email. Talk to you